Okay, so what in there, if anything, looks like something that Rashi might need to comment on?
Why for yourself?
Why for yourself? Exactly, right? Why for yourself, right? I mean, God's saying send spies, right? Not why send for yourself spies, right? And so this is exactly what, well, this is the second Rashi. Okay, the first Rashi is why is the section dealing with the spies juxtaposed with the section dealing with Miriam? Okay, which is something that you would not immediately know. And I myself only knew it by this Rashi comment, because so I had to go back, right? Because one of the problems that, and I've raised this before, is that because we don't read the full parsha, we don't necessarily sort of off the top of our head know what was in the last parsha, right? But there's this rabbinic, and certainly for Rashi, this idea of smichut parshiot, that when two matters are one right after the other, we can deduce that there is a connection, right? And the last thing, the very last thing in Parashat Bahalotcha is Miriam speaking out against Moses and Sipporah, right? We don't know exactly what she was speaking out about, what she was speaking out against. I mean, there are some commentators that say that Miriam didn't like her because she was black, right? I mean, there's always something contemporary in the Torah, right? So some commentators say Miriam didn't like her because she was black, and there are other commentators that say no, actually she was criticizing Moses because Moses had separated from her. I mean, they were still married, but he wasn't intimate with her anymore because he felt, since he was like speaking to God all the time, it was appropriate for him to be intimate with his wife. And Miriam felt that that was wrong, that that's Catholic, it's not Jewish. I mean, even though Catholic hasn't been invented yet, right? But at any rate, she criticized Moses, and God punished her. How?
She had skin disease.
Skin disease, right? Leprosy,
Yeah,
right?
scales.
So
Yeah.
the Torah, again, the Torah is not explicit, but for the rabbis, leprosy is a punishment for slander, right? So that's what happened last week, right? I mean, sometimes when you watch TV stories, right, you see like in last week's episode, right, you have a little, right, the parsha have in last week's parsha, but it doesn't. But in last week's parsha is the incident of Miriam speaking slander against Moses and Sipporah, right? And now this is the next thing that comes right after. Why? Because she was punished over matters of slander for speaking against her brother, and these wicked people witnessed it but did not learn their lesson. Okay, and now to understand that, you have to already know at least what's a bit about what's going to happen in the parsha, right? Because the spies are going to go to the land and they're going to say, oh, you know, it's a wonderful place, but we can't possibly conquer it, right? Which is slander against the land, slander against the people, slander against God, right? But it is a sin committed by speech, right? And so we have already seen a punishment for a sin committed by means of speech, and yet they didn't learn their lesson, right? So that's why the two matters are joined together. Okay, clear? Any comments on that? All right, so then we'll go on. All right. Shelach lecha l'da'atcha, according to your own understanding. I'm not commanding you, but if you wish, you may send. right? Since the Israelites had come to Moses and said, let us send men ahead of us, as it says, all of you approach me, Moses took counsel with the Shekhinah. God said, I told him it is good. Says, I will bring you up from the land, from the affliction of Egypt. He only quotes the first part of the verse, to bring you to a land flowing with milk and honey, etc., etc. By thy lives. Now I will give them the opportunity to err through the words of the spies, so that they will not inherit it. Okay, so what's Rashi saying here? Why does it say Shelach Lecha, send for yourself?
Is that tied to I'm not commanding you? In other words, if you want to do it, go ahead and do it.
Right. It's not right. God is basically having Moses sign a waiver. You know, I'm not responsible. Okay. This is Shelach Lecha, right? If you want to send. I'm giving you permission to do it. But I'm not commanding you to do it, right? Which is rare for God, right? I mean, you know, it's the 10 commandments. It's not the 10 options, right? You know, and we don't have too many places where God said to the Lord spoke to Moses saying, if you want to...
It's up to you.
I know. It's
up to you whether you want to cross the desert.
What?
It's up to you whether you want to leave Egypt. It's up to you whether you want to go to Israel. It's up to you. Right.
Right. Okay. So the point is that, all right, if the people had proper faith in God, it would not be necessary to send the spies, right? Why?
Because they would know that they would not be defeated by anybody.
Wait, one at a time. D.
If they didn't doubt God, or if they had enough faith, then they would be very self-assured that there would be no harm coming to them, regardless of whose land they were in.
Right.
So
not
why
only
would they have to scout it out?
Right. There were, and Marcia, you want to say, because it's like,
I said the same thing.
right, but it's not only that. I mean, you know, there's a two-part promise, right? A, it's a good land. B, you can conquer it, right? I am bringing you to this good land, right? And the fact that the people say, you know what? Let's send spies, right? Let's see what the situation is, indicates a lack of faith in God. Not just a lack of faith in God like kachastam, like random, right? I mean, it's not, because that is the kind of thing that Judaism says, no, you don't do, right? I mean, we don't say, well, Corona Shmarona, we're going to have services because God will protect us, right? And we don't say, who needs a seatbelt? Who needs airbags? God will protect us, right? And there are people who say that. I mean, I had an argument once with a Haredi rabbi who was riding as a passenger in my car, who did not want to put on his seatbelt because he said it shows a lack of faith in God.
Sounds like Trump and no masks.
Well, whatever, okay? But this was way pre-Trump, okay? This was in 1991, okay? I was giving, this guy was a passenger in my car, and I said, please put on your seatbelt. He said, no, my Rosh Yeshiva says that if you put on a seatbelt, it shows lack of faith in God.
Oh my God.
And I said, I have faith in God. I don't have faith in the other drivers. You don't have to wear a seatbelt if you don't want to, but the car is not moving unless you put it on. You know, but here it's not that kind of faith. God specifically told them it's a good land.
Yeah.
God specifically told them that they would displace the other inhabitants. right? So it's not just a sort of general lack of faith, it is a specific failure to believe two explicit promises of God.
Well, that was also part of the covenant with Abraham, right? I mean, so it goes way back.
It goes way, way back. Right. It goes
Right.
way, way back. Absolutely. Right.
So,
No, for sure. For sure. But if you don't want to even go back that far, I mean, this was a promise that was made while they were still in Egypt before they left. Right.
Right.
So the fact that they nevertheless feel that it's necessary to send spies indicates a lack of trust in God, right? Okay, so from the beginning, this is a dubious proposition in God's eyes. Okay, so now we're going to skip ahead. Mostly what we're skipping ahead is the names of the spies, right? But what are the spies going to look for? And again, now who is speaking to them here? I mean, so let me read the English a little bit, okay? After the list of spies, verse 7. When Moses sent them to scout the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up there into the Negev and on into the hill country and see what kind of country it is. Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak, few or many? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not? And take pains to bring back some of the fruit of the land. Now it happened to be the season of the first ripe grapes, right? So who is setting the terms of their mandate? Not God. Moses. Moses is setting the terms of the mandate. God is really not interested in this, right? And he's, and it's a very familiar thing, actually, right? I mean, who among us, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm making assumptions, right? But there's certainly been times in my life when somebody else wants to do something, and I'm saying, you want to do it, I'm not going to stop you, but I am not involved in this, right? Right? I am not involved in this drug deal that you are cooking up, right? I am just not involved. And that's what God has said about this, right? So you shall see what kind of land it is, and the people who inhabit it, are they strong or weak? Are there few or many? Okay, what kind of land it is? Some countries rear strong people and some countries rear weak people. Some produce large populations and some small populations, right? So here, literally, is it a good land? Okay, and this is something that may be foreign to us living in America, right? But the actual sort of, like, we know the environment, right? I mean, the climate, obviously, people who come from warmer climates have darker skin, right? People who come from cooler climates have lighter skin, et cetera, et cetera. But also, like, the general, I mean, if you look at, I mean, I'm 6 feet tall. My dad is 6 feet tall. When I never met my dad's father, but I've seen pictures of him, if he was 5'4", that's a generous estimate, right? I mean, how many of us have, right, pictures of our grandparents, and they were tiny human beings compared to us, right?
Right. Right.
Right, because they grew up malnourished, right? They grew up malnourished. Their mothers were malnourished while our grandparents were in utero, right? They were again, I didn't know my grandparents, but I knew some of my great aunts and great uncles. They were tiny, tiny, tiny people, right? And then the next generation, we're all linebackers, right? That is a product of the conditions in which we were raised versus the conditions in which they were raised, right? Or the conditions, when we were in utero versus when they were in utero, right? So the land, the land really does matter. Okay, are they strong or weak? He gave them a sign. That is to say, Moses gave them a sign. If they live in open cities, it is a sign that they are strong, since they rely on their might. And if they live in fortified cities, it is a sign that they are weak. Okay. I mean, that is so counterintuitive, right? But I think it's absolutely correct, right? I mean, in so many ways, right? I mean, if you look, for example, at subcultures that wall themselves off, right? I mean, think of the Hasidic subculture or the Amish subculture, right? Why do they wall themselves off?
They don't want him to be influenced by the modern civilization. Their way of life is threatened.
Right, which is threatened, which means they are actually fearful, right? That the encounter with the broader society will sap them of their strength in some way, right? And that that societies societies that like to have big military parades to show how strong they are, right?
Or build walls.
What?
Or build walls.
Or build walls, right? It's fear, and you can call it a projection of strength, but it is actually a projection of fear, right? And this is not me saying this. This is Rashi saying it. Okay, who lived 1,000 years ago, right? But Rashi says that if you build walls, it is because you are weak people. If you do not build walls, it is because you are strong and self-reliant. I mean, the first time I read this, which was like 4 years ago, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because it is so profound, right? And so contemporarily relevant, right? And again, if you don't like it, take it up with Rashi, not with me, because this is what Rashi says. I am just quoting him.
If you talk about contemporary relevance, I hope I'm not sounding like Dr. Comrade, but talking about fear versus or weakness versus strength, couldn't the same thing be said of a bully?
Sure.
In that bullies generally really are cowards. And same thing in terms of egos and arguments, that it takes much more strength to say, I made a mistake or I'm wrong, than to power out of whatever you're in. Absolutely.
Right, Lori, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I'm having trouble, I guess, with what Rashi said, because it seems to me you can be strong and still have your defense or your weapons visible, because that's being smart. You don't know that there won't be a stronger tribe coming over, or maybe you won't have time to get your arms together if they're not there and not there right in front of you. So I guess I'm just not sure that this is really smart.
Well, I think you can push it too far, right? I mean, the line between fear and
caution,
wise caution, right, is a matter of opinion, Right.
Yeah.
Right.
In some ways, right? I mean, it really is, right? I mean, certainly, you know, particularly when there are things that we just don't know,
Mhm.
right? Like, you know, discussions about when to reopen this, that, or the other, right? And some people will say, "Oh, you're just being fearful," and other people, and they'll say, "No, I'm not. I'm just being cautious," right?
Mhm.
And others will say, "Oh, you're being, you know, you're being stupid and careless." No, I'm not. I'm trying to live my life in the face of difficult circumstances, right? So I certainly look. Do not advocate disbanding either the U.S. Army or the Israeli Army, right? I do not advocate eliminating police forces.
Right.
But over policing is a sign of fear.
Right.
Now, sometimes fear is justified, right? I mean, sometimes fear, I mean, so that your point in that sense is a good corrective, right? I mean, sometimes fear is justified, right? I mean, I studied something once and I even wrote about it, is that we are all by definition descended from fearful people, right? Because the ones who said, "Oh, look at that beautiful kitty cat," and went over to pet the lion, got eaten, right? So we are all descended from fearful people, right? Because they're the ones who survived,
Mhm.
right? But sometimes that fear can get so maladaptive as to be, you know, as to be unproductive. But
Sure. No, I get that.
it's a balancing
got
act.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's definitely a balancing act. Okay. So we'll skip ahead, right? So now they've come back. They've come back from scouting the land, and now we're in verse 27. This is what they told him: "We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." Okay. Flowing with milk and honey. Any lie in which a little truth is not stated in the beginning cannot be maintained in the end. Okay. I mean, what's Rashi saying here? Again, you have to sort of know the whole story, right? So the spies come back and they say, "It is a wonderful, beautiful, great, fantastic land. We even brought some fruit," right? The bunch of grapes that two men had to carry on a beam, right? You've all seen that, you know, it's the symbol of the Israeli Ministry of Tourism, et cetera, right? It's a wonderful land, but, right? And what's the but? The but is walled cities, strong people will never conquer it, right? So what is, in other words, Rashi is saying, if you want to tell a lie and get away with it, mix in a little bit of truth,
Mhm.
right? What's the lie?
Well, that there are all these giants.
Right, that we won't be able to conquer the land, right?
Right.
Mix in a little truth and your lie can be believable. All right. If it's I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that that's actually true. I mean, Goebbels spoke about the big lie, right? The bigger the lie, the easier it is to sell it, right? I mean, I will tell you, I mean, this is not directly relevant, but it's a good story, and I like to tell stories. So, you know, I lived on a kibbutz for 2 years, And one night I had guard duty, and my partner for guard duty was the treasurer of the kibbutz. So, like, I mean, the only real rule for guard duty is you have to be awake and you have to have your weapon with you and you have to have your walkie-talkie to connect you to the army, right? So I actually did a little bit of patrolling, and Hillel, who was the treasurer, was working in his office. And I came in to have a cup of coffee with him or what, and I saw him fiercely scribbling lines from one piece of paper to the other piece of paper. And he explains to me that he's filling out the annual report that we have to send to the government. And he says to me, and he was South African originally, he says to me, "You have to tell the same lies every year, or else they think you are lying."
It's like reports. That's like reports we have to fill out at the central office for Montgomery County Public Schools.
Right, you have to tell the same lie every year, right? Or the opposite is Judge Judy says, right? If you tell the truth, you don't need a good memory,
Right.
because if you're telling a lot, right, you have to remember. Oh, what lie did I tell? Right, so that you do have to tell the same lie all the time. Anyway, all right. I'm going to skip a little bit, all right? But the point is that what's going on here is God says, "I am tired of these Jews, Moses. I have a great idea. I'm going to kill them all,
Right.
and start all over with you," right? And what's Moses' argument to God that why he shouldn't?
I didn't get what you said.
You said this once before, and I can't
Right.
remember.
Why did you
Moses'
bother bringing
argument?
us out of Egypt?
What?
Why did you bother bringing us out of Egypt?
Only to kill them in the desert, right?
Right.
But
there's something else you said.
But it's more than that, right? Essentially, Moses is saying to God, "This will look bad."
Right.
Right?
For you, God.
This will exactly, it'll look bad for you, because people will say that you didn't have the ability to bring them into the land of Israel, right? And so rather than admit defeat, you just killed them all.
Right.
Right? Because, the whole assumption, right? And this is not an assumption that we follow in the contemporary world, right? But each nation has its own deity, right? And so, Lori, you're new to this class, right? But and you may know this word. I know that you're well studied, but there's a concept called henotheism. Okay, and henotheism means many gods exist, but I only worship one. Okay, and that generally each land has its own deity. Okay, and I believe that this was a stage that our ancestors went through before pure monotheism. Okay, and my proof, there's a million, but one of my proof texts for that is when they got exiled to Babylonia, and they're sitting there and they're saying, "How can we sing God's song in a foreign land?" And why can't you sing God's song in a foreign land? Right? Why can't you? Because you're in Babylonia now. Right? And if you're in Babylonia, you have to worship the deities of Babylonia, not the deity of Israel or of Judea. Right? And so, right? And Pharaoh viewed himself as a deity, right? As the deity of Egypt, right? So the fact that the Exodus occurred is proof that God is stronger than Pharaoh, right? My God's stronger than your God, right? So now, if God can't bring them into the land of Israel, right, which is inhabited by all of these different Canaanite nations, right? The Hittites and the Amorites and the Jebusites and the Perizzites and the Hivites, right? And the stalactites and the stalagmites.
All the ice, right?
Right? It means, so now it's not just God against one deity, right? It's God against 7 deities, right? And God can't defeat them, so he gives up and he kills all the Israelites. And then he starts all over. Okay, and I mean, it's, right, there is this sort of stereotype of Jews who are always saying, you know, Shanda for the Goyim, right? It's a Shanda for the, right? We've all heard, you know, some older relative, right? If only if you're Sephardic have you not heard that, then you might have heard it, right? But at some point, some older relative has, oh, a Shanda for the Goyim, right? But that's essentially what Moses is saying here, right? It'll be Shanda for the Goyim, right? They'll say that you were not powerful enough to overcome the Canaanite deities, and therefore you had to abandon them in the desert, right? So, all right. So if we look, for example, on verse 15, okay, so that is page, let me see, page 4, all right, actually verse 16, right? Since the Lord lacked the ability to bring this nation to the land which he swore to them, he slaughtered them in the desert. Since the Lord lacked the ability, because the inhabitants of the land are strong and powerful, Pharaoh cannot be compared to 31 kings. They will say this about the inhabitants of the land: since the Lord is incapable because he did not have the ability to bring them, he slaughtered them. Okay, now Rashi, I have to say, reads this a little bit differently than I do, okay, because Rashi is not a university trained heretic like I am, right? He is very traditional, right? So, you know, if I told him about henotheism and this was really about the concern that the other deities would look stronger than our deity, you know, he would look at me and say, "Quel dommage," right? Because he spoke French, right? But so Rashi is saying, Rashi is viewing this in terms of human kings, right? That God had the wherewithal to defeat the one human king, Pharaoh, even though Rashi would not deny that Pharaoh saw himself as a deity, right? I mean, that's quite explicit in the Torah, right? But now, so he can beat God versus one king, God wins, right? God versus 31 kings, not so much, right? Okay, so the last thing that I want to look at is if you look at verse 27, starts at the bottom of page 4. How much longer will this evil congregation who are causing to complain against me exist? Ad matai la'eda hara'ah hazot asher hema malinim elai, right? Ad matai la'eda hara'ah hazot. Okay. There a Hebrew word in there. I mean, Ada, right? Ada may not be a word that you recognize off the top of your head, but you recognize it in its construct form, right? Which in Israeli Hebrew would be adat, right? And in Ashkenazi would be adas or adis, right? And in the sort of hybrid type of Hebrew that we used to use, adith, right? So if you see any congregation that is called adat X or adis X or adath X, it's the same word, okay? Like a construct state, like Simchat Torah, right? A happy event is not a simchat, it's a simcha, right? Kihilat shalom, right? A community is not a kihilat, it's a kihila, right? And I know that, you know, from time immemorial, it has become the custom to abbreviate our congregation as kihilat, and every time I hear it, it drives me right up the wall.
Yeah.
It's grammatically incorrect, right? But Ada, right? Adat, Addis, right? Whatever. Like Kelly's congregation in Louisville was Addis Jashur, right? And I belonged in Washington to Addis Israel, right? So Ada means a congregation, right? So God says, you know, how long do I have to put up with ha'edah hara'ah hazot, right? This evil congregation, right? This evil congregation, if we look at the top of the next page, this refers to the spies. We derive from here that a congregation numbers a minimum of 10, okay? Somebody want to explain that to me?
You talked about that the other evening, I think.
Right, I spoke about it last night at the board meeting, but not everybody's on the board.
Oh, okay. Well, then I won't. I
I
won't
know
say.
too, because I was there.
Right. No, if you didn't hear it and you think you know the answer, great. If not, if you heard it and want to share it, that's okay too.
If I don't remember your exact words, but it was something to the effect that of everybody who was sent out, there were only basically 2 good people from the group of was it Caleb and
Joshua.
Joshua, right?
Right.
Trying to remember where you took it from there, but
All right, so it's a little complicated because it's several feats of rabbinic logic, right? God calls them an evil congregation,
That's it.
right?
fine,
There's 10 evil.
There's 10 evil, right?
right.
There's 10 evil. There's Dr. Evil, there's Scott Evil, and 8 other evils, right? It's not fair to lump Caleb and Joshua in as part of the evil congregation because they were good, right? So when God calls them an evil congregation, he's only talking about the 10 bad spies, right? And thus we learn that a congregation is a minimum of 10. In other words, if you search through the Chumash, right? I mean, and you know, if you pull out your concordance, or you go to the Bar Ilan database or whatever, right? And you say, show me every instance of in the Pentateuch, right? You will never see it describing a group smaller than the spies, right? So the smallest possible group that can be called a congregation is 10, right? And so this is considered, I mean, even though, look, there is no mitzvah in the Torah like beferush, like written out word for word, there shall be a minyan and a minyan shall be 10, right?
Right.
But Rabbi, I'm confused because if it takes 10 to validate, this isn't the first time I've been confused, but if it takes 10 to validate a community, then why is it based on an evil number? I mean, if you're calling 10 the spies and so there were 12 and 10 of them were evil, and that's what we validate as the importance of a community or to define it, I don't understand that.
Okay, so part of it is simply numerics. In other words, there is no smaller group than this that is called a community in the Torah. Right? In other words, we want to base things on the Torah.
Well, then are you saying that they represented the tribes that they came from, and that was the larger community?
No.
No.
By community we mean a minyan,
Right.
essentially. Right? So
Right.
so
Now I confused you.
all right, I didn't say the word community, I said congregation.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Okay, but I'm saying the same thing. I'm just misspeaking
Right.
the word.
But in other words, a congregation must consist of at least 10.
Hmm.
How do we know that? Because the smallest grouping in the Torah to which the word congregation is applied is the 10 evil spies. It's purely that. Okay, it's purely that. Now, if you want to go into the realm of midrash, right? I mean, I think that there's a lot that you can learn out from the fact that our idea that a minyan is 10 comes from the 10 evil spies, right? I mean, we don't have litmus tests, right? We don't have litmus tests. I mean, in point of fact, we do. I mean, I don't want to push it. I don't want to push it too far, right? I mean, if a Jew who had converted to Christianity showed up for shul, we could not count that person for a minyan, right? Provided that I knew that, right? I mean, obviously we don't interrogate people when they walk through the door, right? But if somebody shows up and they're wearing, a cross inside a Jewish star, or they start handing out pamphlets about the good news, or, whatever, we know that they're a Jew who has converted to Christianity or to Islam, right? Then we would not count them for a minyan, right? So there are limits. I mean, but we don't say, well, we can't count that person for a minyan because they don't keep kosher, or they don't observe Shabbos, or they're behind on their dues, or whatever it is, right? I mean, as long as you identify as a Jew and are part of the community, we count you for a minyan. We don't have litmus tests, right? I mean.
And you had made the point that the fact that 10 evil men, we could all be horse thieves, and 2 rabbis aren't as good as 10 horse thieves.
Right. For the
Right.
purpose of a minyan, right? 10 horse thieves,
Better
10
than 2
Jewish
rabbis.
horse thieves make a minyan. 9 rabbis don't make a minyan. Right?
It can be bad.
right? I mean, that's
We're listening last night. Okay.
what? Yeah. I mean, that, so on a midrashic level, I think, for me, I think that that's really profound, right? And in fact, I could even tie it into Rashi's point about the walls, right? That we don't build walls to exclude people from our community, right? That the model for a Jewish community is Abraham's tent, which is open on four sides. It's not
Hospitality, right?
It's not the walled city to keep people out, right?
Are you or is Rashi making a distinction between community and congregation, or not? They're
No.
the same. Okay.
Look, I mean, a community. I don't know. That's a good question. I have to give it some more thought, right? I mean, there are different words. There's adal, there's kahal, right? And
And it doesn't, the Hila means,
kahal, I'm not sure that they're the same thing. I'm speaking specifically about the word
okay.
okay, which is congregation. Okay. But Ada and Sibor, which means public, are used in rabbinic literature interchangeably, right? There's Tefillah but Sibor, public prayer, and Tefillat Yachid, private prayer, right? And then it says in Pirkei Avot, Al tifrosh min hatzibor, do not separate from the community, which in Pirkei Avot means that every Jew is obligated to be a member of a shul, right? You are obligated to be a member of a shul, and you're obligated to show up. And if you don't, you've committed a sin, right? You're the sin of separating from the community, right? The problem is that the people who accept this as authoritative don't need it. And the people who do need it don't accept it as authoritative.
Yeah, but then you got 612 to go.
What?
You might do all the 612 other mitzvot, and so you're good.
But yeah, Sue.
But on what Dee said, I don't know if I'm misinterpreting this or not, forgive me, Dee, but it's like, I think of the congregation as a positive thing. You know, you need it for worship and for other things, and yet it's coming from an example where there were evil.
Right.
Right.
You know, it's kind of troubling.
And the whole thing is that's exactly right, Sue. And you said it so much better. But the whole, for me, the idea of minyan is, I understand and I accept community, or more than congregation, community, to validate what needs to be done under those circumstances. But I am having a very hard time with the counterintuitive or illogical, for me, that validation is coming based upon what was evil to begin with, what was untrue to begin with. That, I'm not saying it very well. Sue said it much better, but that's what I'm having.
I get what you're saying. I mean, first of all, it doesn't trouble me. I actually love it. No, because look, most of you know me well. I love paradox, right? I mean, I treasure them. But the point is, for me at least, that there are no litmus tests. There are no litmus tests, beyond at least a basic willingness to say, yeah, I'm a Jew. Okay, now it becomes complicated. I mean, some of you know this story, right? 3 years, the backstory is, when I lived in Baltimore and I was an academic, I had a high holiday pulpit in the Bahamas, okay? And I maintain my relationship with that congregation to this day. 3 years ago, I had to I was fortunate enough to go there to conduct a bar mitzvah, but because the young man had a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother, he had been circumcised, but he hadn't gone to the mikvah or appeared before Beit Din. So before he could have his bar mitzvah, we had to finish his conversion, right? And in order to finish his conversion, you need not just a rabbi, but 2 other witnesses. And it was actually, believe it or not so simple to get 2 other witnesses, because it was in August in the Bahamas, and anybody who lives in the Bahamas and has the money goes somewhere else.
In the summer, yeah.
Right?
Same thing for Florida.
Not to Florida. All right.
No, I said it's the same thing for people.
Right, of course.
Over.
All right. Second difficulty was that, so when I served that congregation, it was the only congregation. Since then, there's a Chabad. And so some of the lay people said, I don't want to sit on the Beit Din for the, because it'll upset the Chabad rabbi, and I don't want to upset the Chabad rabbi, right? So it was not so easy. Now, it turns out, now this is weird, okay, but on Paradise Island, where the Atlantis Casino, right, the Atlantis Resort, there is also the Sivananda Yoga Ashram. Okay, virtually all of the swamis who run that ashram are Israeli. Okay.
Interesting.
And I thought Rashi had a lot of Michigans.
No, so I really had to try and find out, can I use an Israeli Swami as a member of my
All I said was, I don't know how we call a minion out of 10 evil people, and now we get Israeli Swamis.
No, but look, I wouldn't, if there was a Jew for Jesus, if there was a Jews for Jesus residential community, there's no doubt that I wouldn't contact them and say, send 2 people over to sit on, to be on a Beit Din, right? There's no question about it, right? But the question is, can you be? In other words, it was complicated. All right, so I really had, and I don't know a lot about their belief system, right? And so I had to speak to a few people who know halakha and also know their belief system. And I did come to the conclusion that I could use them for a Beit Din if I needed to, because they identify as Jews, okay? And their beliefs are philosophical, not religious. They don't actually believe in a different it turned out that in the end, I managed to find 2 other people, right? And so I didn't need to use the swamis, but you know, this is the world we live in, right? And when you serve Jews in remote places, you come up with interesting, right? But it's utterly baffling to me. Right, but if you go like to the Sivananda Ashram YouTube page, and you know there's a talk, and you know they have a couple of the swamis who are actually from India, right? But if you see a swami who is of Caucasian appearance, right, I can tell immediately that he's going to start his satsang in the following: good morning. Today I will talk about the meaning of contemplation in the, it's just inevitable. And I wish I knew what it was, but but I am not wrong. It's always an Israeli who is speaking good English, but he's having this accent.
You're still not convincing me. I don't think you're trying to convince me, but you definitely confused me, but that's okay.
Then
It's the first time I ever asked you a question where I was always satisfied with, gee, I don't know, I'll have to think about that.
Right.
Or, well, I do agree with you, but I don't agree with you. But it never went by way of India and Israel to Swami's Paradise Island. And so,
right.
and I'm not a fan of Rashi anyway, you know that. So,
Right.
anyway.
But no, look, if you don't like it, you don't like it, right?
No, no.
But I think for Rashi, it's just a question of numbers, right? In other words, it's a pure textual search question. What is the smallest group in the Tanakh to which the term Edah is applied? That's all. Period. Everything else is commentary, right? And you know, halacha is halacha. That's normative, right? Midrash and theology is not normative. You can believe or disbelieve.
But when I was then please clear this up for me, because I think it's I don't know. When I was growing up, obviously women were not allowed to be counted for minyan. They were not allowed to go to the bima, blah, 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 blah. But I was brought up with at least my collective family, that it wasn't just a matter of 10 people, that it was 10 men, but they all also had to have been bar mitzvahed. Is that not right?
They have to be age 13 or above.
They do not have to. Go ahead.
All right. And this is something to wrap up with, okay? A bar or bat mitzvah ceremony is celebratory only, okay? In other words, you become bar or bat mitzvah on your 13th birthday, right? Whether you have a ceremony or do not have a ceremony, right? As opposed to, right, what is a performative ceremony? A wedding is a performative, right? It doesn't simply mark the fact that you're married. You're married by virtue of the ceremony, right? The bar mitzvah doesn't make you obligated to observe the mitzvot and therefore able to count in a minyan. It just celebrates that fact or marks that fact, but it doesn't create the fact.
So essentially, if we were talking about the time period that I was referring to, it simply meant that it had to be 13 years old and male.
Right.
That's what
right. In other words, if for whatever reason they had said to somebody, we can't count you for a minyan because you didn't have a bar mitzvah, you know, with the herring and the schnapps afterwards, we can't count you for a minyan.
Got it.
I'm not saying that they didn't do that, but if they did do that.
They did do that, but you answered my question. Okay.
If they did that, that's just purely wrong. Okay?
Yeah, can I just ask one quick question?
Yes, please.
The number 10, is there anywhere else, whatever, I'll say in the Torah or any other, Jewish anything, where they talk about 10 being, I'll say, a congregation? Or having at least 10?
Not as a congregation per se. I mean, there's lots of 10s, right? There's the 10 Commandments.
Right.
There's 10 generations from Adam to Noah, 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. In the rabbinic period, there's the Asara Haragei Malchut, the 10 martyrs that we commemorate during the martyrology on Yom Kippur, et cetera, et cetera. But but I am not, look, I certainly don't know the whole Torah by heart, right? But I'm not aware of another instance where 10 is used in this specific way to prove this specific point.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank
Go,
you.
everybody.
Thank you. Good
Gosh,
night.
oh,
Thank
Good
you.
everybody.
night, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah,
Good
have a good
night.
evening.
Night.
Night.
Good night.